Welcome to This Golfing Life, a Sounder podcast. My name is Dan Davis, and this week we have a special episode celebrating a very special golfing life.
What is he doing? As opposed to just trying to hit the ball up in the air and seeing what happens with that. But it was an extraordinary shot. And I guess in a way, there have been others, but that one in a way typifies the way Seve saw the game differently to most people.
That's the other thing you forget about that hole. It's so much designed to keep you left off the tee. Anyway, yeah, it was pure Seve, wasn't it?
And later, Phil Mickelson, who I know is of course left-handed, said it was the best looking swing he'd ever seen in his life. He thought that is what a golf swing should look like.
Seve would hit low and high and cuts and hooks and shots that they couldn't ever hit, dream of hitting.
The subject of today's episode would have celebrated his 69th birthday on the Thursday of this year's Masters tournament. He won 5 majors in total, including 2 green jackets in the 1980s, a decade in which he was the dominant player at Augusta National. Mere numbers, however, cannot reflect the impact this player had on both the sport and millions of golfers around the world. To talk about this golfing life, we have 3 guests, all of whom stepped into that life at various times. They watched him up close, wrote about him or photographed him, and understood better than most what made him special. Mr. Robert Green was the editor of Golf World when this week's subject was in his prime and creating instruction articles for the magazine. He later wrote an insightful biography based on many interviews conducted over many years.
And then Seve, from a bit closer and slightly further right, hits his shot and it goes in as well. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And it was pandemonium.
Mr. Mike Clayton competed with him on the European Tour and in Australia, where he developed a singular appreciation of his brilliance and charisma.
And if someone had said to Seve when he was 14, Seve, you must learn to hit the ball straight and you must lose 30 yards and you'll be a great champion, well, he probably could have done that, but he wouldn't have been Seve.
Mr. David Cannon took thousands of photographs of our subject across his career, including some of the most iconic images in the history of the game.
I used to make challenges for him, and then I'd photograph him trying to beat the challenges. And so it was always a bit of a game with him. And I think if you made it a game for him and a challenge, he kind of lit up.
So in this special Masters edition of the podcast, we look back on the extraordinary golfing life of Mr. Seve Ballesteros. In 1976, you were a scratch golfer. And in May 1976, and you were invited to play in a pro-am at the Leicestershire Golf Club. Tell me who you got paired with that day, and what was that experience like?
Yeah, so amazing. It's almost like fate. So I get drawn with a relatively unknown Spanish golfer who's done pretty good things in 75. And he's just burst onto the scene, young Seve Ballesteros. When I look back at it, you just think, if only I had a decent camera. There's not a picture of us playing together. You know, even though in those days there wasn't a first tee pro-am picture done or anything. There's no other than the record of my playing with him. But it's my home course, so I knew that golf course like every blade on that golf course, and he hit it into pastures new. Not wild, by no means wild, but length was, and the strike was just sensational. And amazing memory. 2 months later, he nearly wins the Open.
So, Robert, when did you first become aware of Seve Ballesteros?
Well, actually, the same time probably as a lot of people did, which is the Open at Birkdale in 1976. It was the first Open I went to for all 4 days, of course, and everything was about Seve. You know, I mean, 19-year-old kid who nobody had basically ever heard of, and he nearly wins the Open, and obviously came second to Johnny Miller. So I first really knew of him when he became known to a lot of people. The first round, he's just a name on the leaderboard, which means nothing, as it were, other than the fact his elder brother, Manuel, was quite well known. But I certainly walked all the last 2 rounds with him and matched with Miller because obviously he then was undoubtedly the only subject of interest. I was 23 at the time, and I was freelance writing for Golf World magazine. That is to say, I wasn't on staff, but I would do occasional articles for them. They got me the accreditation for that Open. And as I obviously, like everybody, was just captivated by Seve in his just extraordinary bravura.
And that last day, obviously, he was in he was battling with Johnny Miller, who went on to win that Open.
He started off with a 2-shot lead, and that had increased to 3 by the time they played the first hole. And Miller then said afterwards, I'm thinking, oh, this could get out of control here. But then there was a 2-shot swing in the next hole, and he said he had several really bad holes, a double bogey, maybe a triple, until he's falling down the leaderboard and looks like he's going to come second, which he did. He tied with Nicklaus behind Miller. But is that on the 13th, Seve made an eagle, hold a chip, and to arrest the slide and give him the chance to go on to be run out. I mean, Miller was by this point 6 shots clear. And Miller then spoke to him in English, in Spanish, I beg your pardon. And that Seve hadn't known until that moment that Miller could speak Spanish. He'd try and speak his pidgin English to Johnny, but Miller, at this point, having safely seen him off and got the tournament basically won, decided he'd give a bit of Spanish to Seve.
That 76 Open is synonymous not only with Johnny Miller at his absolute peak, but that shot that Seve hit on the 18th,
between the bunkers,
the chip and run between the two bunkers. I mean, how many players would have even seen that as an option, never mind tried to take it on? I mean, it was an exceptional golf shot, wasn't it?
I mean, there isn't a shot, and then it looks the most obvious thing in the world you do. Of course, he'd run it up between the bunkers. Why wouldn't he? But I think it's true to say, and I haven't heard back the comments in a long time, the sort of feeling was, the comment is that, what is he doing? As opposed to just trying to hit the ball up in the air and seeing what happens with that. But at the time, I was on the golf course, obviously, but it was an extraordinary shot. And I guess in a way, there have been others, but that one in a way typifies the way Seve saw the game differently to most people.
But that performance in 76 earned him an invitation to the Masters in 77. But interestingly, it also, I believe, put him on the front cover of Golf Digest, which was a pretty punchy move from Golf Digest at that time to feature. Yeah, I mean, talk to us a little bit about that, because you're ideally placed in terms of being able to explain what that said about Seve's sort of meteoric rise.
I mean, I think there's two things. Is the PGA Tour has got now many more non-Americans playing on it, but then it was a pretty parochial organisation, and nearly all the best golfers in the world were undoubtedly American. For Golf Digest, then the world's best-selling golf magazine, to put on the cover of the magazine a Spanish teenager with the headline, "Can this teenager win the Masters?" It's extraordinary in itself for that reason, but even more so because 11 out of 12 covers of Golf Digest every year will be, maybe 12 out of 12, will be an instruction-based cover. How to play better bunker shots, how to hit it further, or something. To put a comparatively unknown, though obviously he was getting a reputation now, Spanish golfer on the cover was, I would imagine they had several editorial meetings about that one.
Then 2 years later, I pick up a camera and I go to Royal Lytham for the practice rounds. I have a job at that stage in my life selling nylon sheets, but it was quite an easy job to do a lot of it on the phone. So I used to take sneaky days off and I went to Lytham for a practice round, and I took my first pictures of professional golfers in July 79 at the Open.
Did you follow Seve? Did you follow Seve that day?
I couldn't find him. The most irritating, I couldn't, how practice days, in those days there were no scoreboards and absolutely no idea of where anybody was on the golf course. Yeah, so, but it was just experiencing that, and I think I parked my car in the car park that he was hit the ball into on the Sunday. So, and it was, the Open was so small in comparison to what it is now.
79, as Seve wins his first Open Championship, his first major at Royal Lytham, and he was branded the car park champion, which was something that he railed against, and I think something that really stuck with the American audience. There was this sense, and I think that he felt that they saw him as lucky because he was wayward off the tee, when in fact his strategy off the tee at Lytham was given to him by Roberto Di Vincenzo, who said, aim out there because you've got an easier second shot in. What do you remember of that 79 Open and also that sort of branding of him as the car park champion?
Well, it's true. I mean, I can't remember if I was on the 16th when he played that hole, as in the car park bit in 1970, the final round of 79. I did walk a lot in the final round of 79. I don't remember that bit, but I do remember him saying afterwards, and him being essentially correct, that he was used to categorise him unfairly.
How many players in the world could do what he could do? And it was largely hung on him by the Americans too, who were used to seeing Halo and who he was playing with plod his way beautifully down the middle of the fairway onto the green, one or two putts to win. And Seve wasn't going to play like that. That wasn't who he was. But
car park in question, where he drove to on the 16th hole in the last round, was an overflow car park. That bit in itself, you might think, doesn't matter. But what is relevant is it implies he's hit it miles offline and he's just somehow or other flukes it.
Shorter shot and a better route to that's the other thing you forget about that hole. It's so much designed to keep you left off the tee. That's the way. Anyway, yeah, it was pure Seve, wasn't it? And the referee, funnily enough, at that time, whose voice you hear on the if you look on YouTube and you see the thing, there's a guy called John Berend, who was a fantastic member of Hoylake, Royal Liverpool, which I'm still a member of, because I joined Hoylake in '76, I think it was. And he's so nervous. You can hear in his voice that he's dealing with a rampant Seve at a key moment. And
and also quite a few vehicles as well that needed to be moved. How on earth did they find the owners?
I don't know, but they didn't move the vehicles, did they? They gave him a drop in the nearest point, I think.
His drive had left him 90 yards to the flag, so it can't be that offline. He had a sandwich in which he hit into whatever his 20 feet and made the putt. So it's a car park because the cars were there. But car park makes it sound like he did 2 miles down the road. He was 90 yards from the flag. So how bad a drive could it have been?
And he was a prodigious driver of the ball as a younger guy, wasn't he? I mean, people have this idea that he was incredibly wayward because of maybe Lytham and because of the way he played Birkdale, and then maybe how he was in later life when his game sort of deserted him. But he was an incredible driver of the ball, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. I mean, he was a fabulous driver of the ball. In later life, as you say, particularly, which we'll details say, like the Ryder Cup in Oak Hill, he couldn't hit a fairway, basically couldn't hit a fairway. That wasn't true before, but if there are two elements of driving, his length was always better than his accuracy.
Now, people say Seve was a bad driver. I mean, Seve hit incredible shots with his driver. Sure, he could hit it offline, but Graham Marsh or Hale Irwin or John Bland or Antonio Garrido could tee it up and hit the same shot down the fairway on every hole, straight, in play, on the side of the fairway they were aiming at. But it was a very similar flight, and it was the same shot, and it was super effective, and they made a lot of money doing it. But Seve would hit low and high and cuts and hooks and shots that they couldn't ever hit, dream of hitting. And if someone had said to Seve when he was 14, if Manuel had said, Seve, you must learn to hit the ball straight and you must lose 30 yards, take 30 yards off your drive, hit the ball straight, hit the ball in the fairway in every hole, and you will be a great champion. Well, he probably could have done that, but he wouldn't have been Seve. And he was a great champion because he didn't do that. And he hit so many cool shapes with the driver. Seve was a bad driver. I mean, give me a break. I mean, and he, that was the height of his sort of wild driving, time, I guess. But
at Augusta, you can't contend unless you're driving pretty straight because you'll be in the trees all the time. It isn't like an open links where there aren't trees. So you can't be that wayward at Augusta to keep yourself in with a chance.
Why do you think it was that he loved Augusta so much?
I mean, it's a funny thing in a way, Dan. One of the things he said to me before I'd been to Pedreña was when he got to Augusta, he really liked it because it reminded him of his home course. Now, I had been to Augusta before I went to Pedreña, and I didn't really see it other than the fact that they are both very green, which is maybe stating the obvious about a golf course, but there is that. I mean, it isn't as tree-lined as Augusta, but obviously something, and he said this more than once, in Seve's mind, he went to Augusta for the first time, he sees it, and something about it reminded him of Pedreña. So that made him feel at home. And it's very hard to pin. I can't pin down exactly what that was, but that's what was in his mind.
His uncle, Ramon Sota, had played in the Masters in the 1960s and actually finished tied sixth in 1965, which was the best result by a European. What was the relationship like between Ramon Sota and Seve?
I mean, it was I never met Ramon Sota, but it was a decent relationship, a good relationship, except the point that came down to it, and I don't know how much resentment there may have been from Ramon towards Seve, but Ramon's attitude was always, no, you can go to play to America, Seve, but you'll never win there. You can never be any good there because they're so much better. His whole mindset was, if you like, a very, shall we say, typical European attitude towards American golfers at that time. Is they're superior. You forget about ever being able to challenge them. And Seve, of course, thought that was nonsense.
And talk to us a little bit about what you came to learn about where Seve grew up and his background. Obviously, the stories of him playing golf on the beach and jumping over the wall of Royal Birkdale and playing there are well known. But what did, in all the times that you spoke with Seve and wrote the book about him, what did you learn about his upbringing and his background and that very close-knit environment that is Birkdale?
Well, I think in a way that how Seve started in golf is like in a position that he was rebelled about the Ramon Sota point of view. Seve was started off as a caddy and you weren't allowed to do anything. You couldn't hit shots on the golf course. I mean, everything was what you couldn't do. And Seve obviously thought this was completely wrong. He thought he should be able to hit golf balls on the course, and he should be able to, do what he wanted within reason. He knew the members, but he thought that was wrong. So, of course, he used to sneak on at night and play when it was dark because then nobody on the course to see him playing on the golf course. He did always practice on the beach because, of course, he could do that because it wasn't on the golf course. But it was like a lot of things, and later on Ramon's attitude would justify what people thought, but that Seve basically had a load of obstacles put in his way, and he obviously really had to want to play golf to be able to do it. And I guess in part, maybe, because he had to try so hard to do it, made him determined to become as good as he possibly could be.
You're listening to This Golfing Life, a Sounder podcast. For 20% off your next Sounder purchase, simply enter the code POD20 at checkout. That's POD and the number 20. Check out new season polos and year-round wardrobe staples at soundergolf.com. Code limited to one use per customer. As the 70s sort of about to turn into the 80s, in 1979, obviously he wins his first major championship, winning the Open at Lytham, and he finishes tied 12th at Augusta. But he's starting to get more opportunities in America at this time, isn't he?
Well, he is, but this became, as you obviously know, it was a thing which looks kind of odd with the way that obviously so many European tour players, like this Tommy Fleetwood, obviously Rory McIlroy, who played the PGA Tour and did it successfully. The Americans, the commissioner then was a guy called Dee Beeman, felt that his home tour was Spain since he was Spanish, whereas obviously Seve lobbied eventually successfully that his home tour should be regarded as Europe. So, but it was forever a fractious relationship.
1980 clicks by, and we're almost at the point where you join Golf World magazine here. But Seve, he's the reigning Open champion, and he goes to Augusta and claims his first green jacket. What are your sort of takeaways from that 1980, or what are your memories of it?
I think, and I watched that on TV, but which I suspect was then on the BBC. The thing about that was, of course, Seve's going to win. You know he's going to win, and he's 10 shots ahead with 9 holes to play, and then suddenly he might not win because he's gone in the water a couple of times, and you think, oh my God, this could be catastrophic. I mean, it's a finished career. Anyway, he did. He righted the ship, steadied it eventually, and then he birdied the 15th, par 5 50, and indeed he got home. He won by 4. But there was definitely, 25 minutes there on the back 9 when it looked not impossible he could throw it away.
He shot the lowest 72-hole score in 1980 of the whole decade of all the 80s. 66, 69, 68 to open up. So like you say, 7 clear after 54 holes. Ford Hardin in the, and I can't remember, I don't know where this quote is attributed from, whether it was in the Butler cabin afterwards or, during the presentation of the green jacket, but apparently said, "Tell me, Seve, people are always asking me, how tall are you?" I mean, does that speak to still the fact that even though he'd just claimed his second major championship in the space of 2 years, that there was still a sort of reluctance to accept this guy was the real deal?
There is that possibility down. The other possibility is it's just a typical hard-heartedinality. Really, he shouldn't have been let loose to ask questions with a microphone. Actually,
1983, he wins again.
I played with him in 1983 at Huntingdale in the Australian Masters, and Huntingdale was a super narrow golf course. bouncy, windy. And he drove it as much or more than any of us did because there were lots of iron shots there. And he hit the driver beautifully for 2 days. In fact, this was in February of 1983. And Manuel Ramos was caddying for him, who'd won the Portuguese Open in sometime in the 70s. And he ripped this beautiful 3-wood on Friday through the wind to the 10th hole to about 6 feet. Just a beautiful shot. And he missed the putt. And I was standing next to Manuel. I said, he's not putting very well. He said, no, he's not, but he will be by April, which is when he won the Masters by 4 shots. He was just a phenomenal player. No, but he will be by April. He was just down practicing and getting ready. But he was driving the ball beautifully there.
You're working as assistant editor at Golf World magazine at this time, which had a huge circulation in the 1980s. And he wins again in a Monday finish. What do you remember of the 1983 Masters, Robert?
Well, as you say, it was a Monday finish because the weather was shocking on the weekend, so they lost the day there. But obviously, essentially, it's exaggerated to make a point because, of course, things could have gone wrong after. But basically, Seve won it with his play of the first 4 holes on Monday afternoon. He birdies the first, he eagles the second, and he nearly has a hole in one on the 4th. So he's 4 under for the day already, and that 4 clear. And he was never got his lead reduced below those 4 shots to the rest of the round. Obviously, things could have gone wrong. There were still 14 holes to play, but he basically had it under control from that point on.
I think there was a real admiration for Seve amongst the top players, but there was still a certain sort of antipathy towards him among the rank and file, wasn't there? And even though he's won a major, he's become the first European to win the Masters, which is a huge sort of breakthrough in terms of golf history. And obviously the floodgates would open in terms of European victories after that. But he was still sort of fighting the tide slightly, wasn't he?
Yeah, no, he was. I mean, and there would always be that because of the, as I say, the PGA Tour and D. Beeman's interest to look after all his members. A lot of them, as I say, resented the fact that the Spaniard was coming to take their money. They couldn't see any upside for them, Seve playing in America.
And then obviously as time went on with his starring role in the European Ryder Cup wins, that sort of antipathy became a bit more deep-rooted because he was very much their bogeyman, wasn't he, when it came to Ryder Cups?
Without a doubt. I mean, it's obviously the Ryder Cup is now a very big deal. I mean, one of the biggest events in sports. I think it's probably true to say of all events in golf, but it's probably looked forward to more than any other golf event because people who actually don't follow golf very much, you can get into the Ryder Cup, your guy to beat their guy, and it's fantastic. But it was really, they didn't sell out. There was not a bigger deal at all. In America, almost nobody went. But Seve, more than any other one other single person, revitalized the Ryder Cup. He was the single biggest reason why it became what it's become today.
Yeah, and that was an incredible year for Seve. He obviously wins his 3rd major at the Masters, his 2nd green jacket. And like you say, he talked about those 4 holes were the best I ever played in my life, I think he said in later life. But he also won that June in Westchester, I think his 2nd sort of regular PGA Tour event. But then in the 83 Ryder Cup, that was the start of that process about turning the tide in the Ryder Cup, wasn't it?
It was. I mean, Europe lost by a single point in Palm Beach Gardens, 14.5 to 13.5. But of course, the last time the United States had been beaten in the Ryder Cup was by GB&I in 1957. But in America, routinely, we would get thrashed, GB&I or as Europe. But this says only 1 point in it. So quite clearly, I mean, throughout the entire final day singles, the match was live. It could have gone either way. It went America's way. But Seve, in the dressing room afterwards, they're changing out the locker room. The players are a bit, we failed. And Seve was like, no, this is a success. We nearly did it. We're getting there. We'll do it. We will do it. We will do it. That sort of thing. And as in which is unusual because he wasn't normally like this, but he sort of saw the glorious failure as actually a victory.
Yeah, and it was certainly that. I mean, I think he went out first in the singles.
He did. He was Zeta. He was Zeller. He was 3 up against Zeller, and in the end had to scramble to make a half in the match. Which obviously, if he'd won the match, well, it'd been different.
Well, he made a half largely thanks to a shot that Jack Nicklaus described at the time as the greatest golf shot ever hit, which is one that wasn't covered on the network television coverage in the US, because I think they came live a bit later than that.
Yeah,
but tell us about that. Tell us about that shot that nobody's ever seen but seem to know so much about.
No, you're exactly right. Many people, myself included, Bernhard Langer included, are sure they've seen it on TV, even though we're all assured you can't possibly see it on TV because nobody ever screened it. I had a long conversation with Langer about this. And he said, no, apparently you didn't, Bernard.
I was due to go to that Ryder Cup, but on the Sunday, before I was due to fly out on the Tuesday, phone call from Tony Duffy, who was the boss at that stage. Dave, I've pulled your trip. You're not going to America. Oh, like that, And then when I was watching the Ryder Cup at home, I was, in a funny sort of way, I was praying they wouldn't win it, which is a horrible thing to say, but being selfish and everything else about it. And we got so close to winning that Ryder Cup. And he hit that incredible shot out of that fairway bunker.
Do you feel like you've seen that shot? Because I feel like I have.
But absolutely. But I'm sure I've seen it. I'm sure there has been. I'd like to think there's some film of it, but if not, there's a couple of very nice stills. Phil Sheldon and Brian Morgan both got really nice pictures of it.
It's a par 5 hole. Seve is level with Zeller, and he hits a really poor drive into rough, and the rough is bad. From there, he hits it from the rough into a fairway bunker about 240 yards from the hole, and he then hits, basically having to curve it left to right, a 3-wood from the sand, which lands on the back of the green, which we say, Nicklaus said, I'm sure nobody else could possibly hit that shot. Nobody else would even thought of trying to hit that shot. They would have hit it somewhere like 100 yards short of the green and tried to get up and down.
I'm convinced that I've seen that shot, because I can still see it coming over the water. I can see it coming over the water and sort of just running through almost into the fringe at the back.
Yeah, but the thing is, and I spoke to someone from American TV, they said, no, we'd set up cameras, but it was only on the back of the green and we only showed the putting. I have no clue. I think I've seen it, but I'm told that's not possible.
You're listening to This Golfing Life, a Sounder podcast. You can find out more about Sounder at soundergolf.com. What are the sort of things that really stick out for you, not just of Seve, but what are your sort of keenest memories, if you like, or the memories that really have endured from that 84 Open at St Andrews?
I think, I don't remember. I did walk the whole last round with him, and obviously it was he was playing with Langer, whereas in the match behind Tom Watson is with Ian Baker Finch, and obviously by the time it got to the back 9, it was obviously going to be between either Seve was going to win or Watson was going to win, and I was with Seve, so walked up the 18th and saw him make the putt that he made, which he celebrated so deliriously.
But golf, you have to, you can go 6 months without a good celebration picture, a final putt picture, literally. If you actually look at the tournaments, and you've got to be in the right angle, and I always go back to my picture of Seve at St Andrews. That angle I got, I thought that had passed me by, really. When he held the putt and he did the fist, the follow through with the fist, it was totally at 45 degrees to me, because I'd sat in a spot where I was looking for a nice background. But then he turned around and he pumps up in the air and he's looking almost straight at me. And it's like, and then I nearly ran out of film. Well, that's another story.
And looking down, my eyesight was then especially one could see, didn't know what quite had happened. You could see that Watson was indeed against the wall on the 17th. So definitely not where he should have been on the golf course. So thinking, if Seve makes this putt, given the fact that Watson is in trouble on 17, Seve makes this putt for birdie, likely that's won the Open. And he obviously did make the putt.
Seve, moments before, had hit an imperious second shot on the 17th, which had caused him problems all that week, hadn't it?
Oh, yeah. He'd bogeyed the hole every day, but this time, having hit... Yeah, he hit it just in the left rough, and he hit a 6-iron, which into, 50, 60 feet. But yes, the 17th gave him trouble. It's given him huge trouble in 1978. But when it mattered most, he came through with what he needed to do, which was to par the hole.
Our offices were in Morden in South London, and I drove overnight from St Andrews, because I was so excited about it. I'm desperate to see what picture I'd got. And I remember about 3 o'clock that afternoon, I'd already had duplicates made, which was pretty quick. And I remember driving over to the Slazenger headquarters, which were in Croydon, and giving the pictures to John Parsons, who was the marketing guy for Slazenger. And and literally, by the end of that week, that picture was being used on the Underground, those big advertising on the stations and on the bus stops in London. So that picture means an awful lot.
Mike Clayton's mentioned there's not many players have won major tournaments, not necessarily major championships, but major tournaments at the Old Course, Augusta National, and Royal Melbourne, which is something that Seve has done. Three courses that are very sort of interlinked in terms of Alison Mackenzie, in terms of shot making, in terms of just creativity.
The equipment then, of course, meant you probably could do more in terms of shaping the ball, but of course you also had to have a greater ability. I mean, nowadays, I don't know who take them. Pros routinely will have 5 wedges of various sorts. Seve would have had 2, a sand wedge and a pitching wedge. And basically he would, if he had a shot of, say, 90 yards, which a club, he would have to abbreviate the backswing, go down the shaft, or do something to change the swing. Now, you've got a wedge that hits it. That's the exact full shot. So you had to be a way better shot maker then to do well. And of course, Seve was now I suspect there probably hasn't been a better shot maker.
You're listening to This Golfing Life, a Sounder podcast. You can find out more about Sounder at soundergolf.com.
And in the 80s, Seve, the PGA Tour Beeman gave way and said, okay, Seve played the 15 events and you've got to play 15 and you keep your card and that's fine. And then Seve starts playing worse the more he plays, and he paid more money playing 7 or 8 events a year. And he thought, why am I doing this? And eventually it was just a permanent squabble over a period beginning in the 70s, late 70s when he won at Greensboro, ending in a way, not quite ending because he won in 88 on the PGA Tour, but in 86 when he, again, we'll get on to the Masters. He went into that Masters in 86, having played because he was banned from the PGA Tour because he had not stuck with their rules. He played in New Orleans, which was a tournament which he was defending champion, and the rest of them he had to play on a satellite tour. He couldn't. It actually played 8 rounds of competitive golf before he got to Augusta. So it was his rows with the PGA Tour were ongoing. I mean, it wasn't every single day, but every year Beeman would try and do something differently, and Seve would try and do something differently. And of course, the fact was, Beeman was the guy who was running the show.
Yeah, and Seve wasn't going to back down.
And Seve wasn't going to back down. And also, of course, it should be said that the top American golfers, by which I mean Nicklaus, Trevino particularly, were of the view that Seve should be able to basically do what he wanted because Seve was great. Your average PGA Tour player thought, or a lot of them, but they basically thought, this is Seve's phrase he used to put in, here comes that Spaniard to steal our money. So they really didn't see why Beeman should let Seve play.
Which means that he comes into 86 very undercooked, but also, undercooked because of the ban on the PGA Tour, but also because his father was very ill and he was dealing with his father's illness, which was, something that was occupying a huge part of his heart and mind and time.
Yeah, there was that. There was all of that, and no one. Seve, I think I don't turn out the answer, and I don't. He kept some stuff locked away, and I think a lot of it was because it was to do with his dad. I mean, if he had won the 86 Masters, then he would have regarded it as the ultimate vindication for his strategy. Regarding Beeman, he would have won it for his dad, of course. He would have it would have been the ultimate proof that Seve's right and everyone else is wrong.
And he had a great chance. I mean, everybody remembers that 1986 Masters because of Jack Nicklaus winning his 18th and storming in with a final 65, which was one of the the iconic afternoons in golf. But Seve, it was in Seve's hands. He had sort of one arm in the green jacket, didn't he? He was playing with Tom Kite in the final round.
He was,
and Tom Kite and him, definitely sparks flew between those two.
Oh yeah, they didn't like each other at all.
Yeah. Where did that sort of complete enmity stem from?
I actually don't know the original thing, but on the first green, there was some spat between Kite's caddy and Vicente. And basically, so that's about who should have held the flag or something for who. I can't remember which way around it is, but there's an inter-caddy spat. And that basically was feeding the whole thing going through the for the whole the final rounds.
Tom Kite hold out for an eagle on 8, hold his third shot.
Yeah, I was there. And then Seve held out for even further, yeah. So he held out from nearly as far out. Yeah, I know, it was incredible. I was stood with Michael Bernal watching that.
Well, yeah, just describe the shot, just describe the scene of where they were in terms of the final round.
I was behind the green, behind the 8th green, as I recall. So Kite goes first, as he's further away, and he's, I'm guessing, about 90 yards away on the right side of the green, short of the green, and he hits the shot on, it comes up and it goes in the hole. And so obviously the crowd go bonkers, as you should expect, because Kite was then probably only a shot or two behind Seve. And so he's definitely a chance to win. And then Seve, from a bit closer and slightly further right, hits his shot and it goes in as well. I mean, it was ridiculous. And there was pandemonium. You just couldn't believe. For everyone there watching, you've just seen this happen twice in a row. I mean, it just doesn't happen.
Seve makes another eagle on the 13th.
Yeah.
And I imagine because Vicente was certainly pretty excited about the second shot Seve hit in there. Were you watching that hole? Were you on that hole?
I was there, yeah. I think with that, obviously it's famous. It'd be on the side-on swing of Seve's second shot from the 30 into that green, which he hit to about 6 feet. I think is a 6-iron. And later, Phil Mickelson, who I know is, of course, left-handed, said it was the best-looking swing he'd ever seen in his life. He thought that is what a golf swing should look like. And Vicente, who could be a bit, well, possibly, should we say, temperamental, maybe he wasn't the most solid guy, did get a lot of flack for the fact that he went up and congratulated Seve on it like we're winning already, which I think actually is slightly harsh, because when all said and done, I mean, Seve had to make the putt, which he did make. It wasn't like, it's all over, forget it. I mean, it could have missed the putt. Then it would have. But it was, in isolation, I think that's that was a bit harsh on the 15th, and he's got a 2-shot lead, and he's hit a very good drive, and he's between a 4-iron and a 5-iron. That's basically, he has about 5 minutes to wait before hitting his second shot on 15, because waiting for the 15th green to clear and all the other stuff. And he's also, part of else he's thinking about, to do with his dad and sticking it to Dean Beeman and trying to win this tournament. He's also thinking, there's bloody Tom Kite. So basically, he had a lot of things on his mind, I'm sure. None of which he should have had, other than how to hit the shot ahead.
I was following Seve at the time, and Seve had just eagled 13, and we're all, thinking, he's going to win this. And I'm going down 14 par, and I'm thinking, right, I'm going to follow Seve down 15. And at the same time, Nicholas has gone on this incredible run, eagle 15 and birdie 16, and he's coming up 17 the other side. And I literally am walking. I walked 10 paces one way with Seve, and then 10 paces across to 17. I must have changed direction 4 times, literally. And I finally, inside me, it said, you've got to go with Nicholas. I did, luckily.
Even though your hero was bearing down a third Masters green jacket.
And I never saw him win a green jacket.
Usually in those situations, particularly under pressure, the feeling is usually people say, you better go hit the hard 5 rather than the soft 4. Is you make a full swing rather than try and do something slightly fancy. And he went with the 4, the soft 4, and well, everybody knows it didn't even come close to making it across the water. As I say, I think there's a load of other things caused Seve to hit it in the water. Fundamentally, the fact he chose the wrong club. But there's obviously, maybe he chose the wrong club because of all the stuff that's going through his head, which ideally shouldn't have been in his head.
How much do you think snatching defeat from the jaws of victory in 86 hurt Seve?
I think enormously. I mean, and I remember after the next day, so everybody, mostly then just flies out from Atlanta airport to London. Seve's flying out from Atlanta to Madrid. The planes were at a similar time. I see him in the lounge. And I sort of say, how are you? And I said, sorry, such a stupid question. He said, not a stupid question, have my health. And so he sort of, I mean, he hadn't got over it, but at least he was acknowledged it to that extent.
People asked him in later life whether that was a sort of a killer blow in his career, but he did get over it because he did go on to win another major. But he said that shot was the difference between him winning 10 majors and 5 majors.
Yes, and I can totally understand why he would say that. what you've alluded to, I think, is very relevant. If he had not won the Open in '88 at Lytham, I think, most importantly, he would have had a different view of his own career. And I think people like you and many other people would have a different view of his own career. Basically, the '86 Masters finished it. That would have been the essential takeaway from that. But it wasn't, because he won at Lytham. Obviously, he nearly won the Masters in '87, which no doubt you're about to discuss. But it should have also that 18 months later, at Jack Nicklaus's Muirfield Village, Seve, nobody can single-handedly win the Ryder Cup, but Seve, as much as anyone ever could, he did. He was unbelievable.
Yeah, he really was. Let's go to '87 then. I mean, which is, he finished tied second, which doesn't really tell the story, does it? I mean, he lost in the playoff. There was with Larry Mize and Greg Norman were the other two in the playoff, and obviously Larry Mize hit this incredible chip on the second hole of the playoff, the 11th, and holes an impossible chip. But while Larry Mize is doing that, Seve's walking up the hill in tears, isn't he? What are your recollections of that final day in '87?
Walking quite a lot, and then there was crowd see more than New Zealand, and Augusta is hard to get. You can't get to see so well as you kind of say the Open, but I get back in the press tent. So they say, "Oh my God, Seve's hit it stiff on 17," which he had. So made a birdie, which eventually gets him into the playoff with Greg Norman and Larry Mize. Dan Jenkins, the late American writer, famously wrote about Mize, Norman, and Seve. Larry Mize was like the maitre d' who was going to show them to their table, because obviously you would think, okay, there's these three guys in the playoff. There's Seve, there's Greg Norman, who, of course, at that point was the Open champion, and Larry Mize, who's some guy from Augusta really nobody's ever heard of. And, of course, as you say, Seve three-putts it from 30 feet on 10. He would say later that, obviously, it's late in the afternoon. There's sort of the shadows fall badly. It was difficult to read the putt at that time. But basically, he missed a 3-foot putt, which didn't come close to hitting the hole. And so, yes, he's out of the playoff. And having what happened to him in '86, he's suddenly given a chance to, win the Masters again. Then it goes away with that happening. And then, as you say, Larry Mize chips in and wins it.
And that was, that was really it for Seve in terms of really contending in the Masters, wasn't it? He finished tied fifth in '89.
Well, clearly '89. He started with obviously it's the one that Fowler won, but he held his bunker shot he held out from bunker shot on 2. He holds a monster putt on 4, another on 5, and suddenly you think he could do this, and he's out. I think in 31, he's in it, and then he hits it in the trees on 10, and it makes bogey, and actually he didn't make a birdie on the back 9. So he's never really close to the business end, but there was a period of time around the turn on that Sunday when it seemed possible he could win. But no, then once the back 9 started, that slipped away.
He has a chance on the front 9 at the Masters in '89. And 1990, he finishes tied 7th. That was the last top 10 for Seve at Augusta National. But what a record he had. I mean, let's just take it from his record in the 80s. 1980, he wins. 1981, miscut. 1982, tied 3rd. 1983, he wins. 1984 is a miscut. 1985 is tied 2nd. 86 is 4th. 87 is tied 2nd, losing a playoff. 88 is tied 11th. 89 is tied 5th. That's some record, isn't it, at Augusta National? I mean, he was a serial contender and somebody who played that course as well as anyone.
Yeah, no, he was. Absolutely. As I say, in part, that probably comes about from the fact that he liked it so much. I mean, obviously, you're going to play a course better if you enjoy it. But also, obviously, he had great touch. And Augusta required great touch. The controlling the ball around those greens was very difficult.
You're listening to This Golfing Life, a Sounder podcast. You can find out more about Sounder at soundergolf.com. You had a close relationship with Seve that developed over many years. I mean, you weren't just photographing him in tournament play. You were doing instructional stories with him. You were doing books with him. Tell us about how that relationship really began and how it developed over that period.
I've always had this thing that I try and give, if players win a major, I'll always give them my favorite picture of whatever. point it was, whether it's a final putt or a nice picture in the final round or a trophy shot, I always give them prints. And, so obviously I gave Seve the pictures from the 84 Open, and he was obviously really thrilled with them. And that kind of started it. And then when I was working with Golf World magazine, doing their instruction work, and he luckily had a contract with Golf World magazine, so that's where that started.
Golf World was then owned by Golf Digest, and I think Golf Digest probably had some contractual deal with Seve. Or they did several articles, some articles with him, which then came to us. But basically, Seve signed Golf World as an instructor when I went back to the magazine in 87, 88, and that's when we did that deal.
But for such a natural player, how did it work with those instruction pieces? Was he good at articulating what he did? Because he was a genius, and it's very difficult for geniuses sometimes to be able to transmit that information.
I don't know whether it was just the fact that I was a good golfer or whatever, but I was working with Robert and Richard Simmons and Steve Newell at Golf World, and I used to go in there with a view that whatever the subject they were working on the piece was, I used to make challenges for him, and then I'd photograph him trying to beat the challenges. And so it was always a bit of a game with him. And I think if you made it a game for him and a challenge, he kind of lit up. Well, he always lit up in pictures anyway, but it sort of took away the monotony of it all. And so why am I doing this swing sequence? I did it for X magazine 3 weeks ago or somewhere in America, And I said, we want to make it different. We want to make it to show the readers how different you are. And then, I'd ask him to hit a 30-yard hook and this sort of stuff. And we had great fun doing it. And I think that's where the friendship started, because we had fun.
Yeah. 88, Seve finishes the year first on the European Tour Order of Merit again. He finished tied 11th in the year that Sandy Lyle won the Masters, but then goes on to win the Open and has an incredible year that year. 8 victories, I think it was, in all worldwide. By 1988, Seve is a contributing editor to Golf World. You're the editor at Golf World. How did the sort of relationship change?
I mean, I think because of the stuff we alluded to before. So I'd got to know him quite well over a period of time. And then I would in 89, actually, my wife and I had dinner with Seve and Carmen, his wife, at the French Open when this time a couple of times, so that sort of thing would happen. So you'd see him sort of socially as well as at golf tournament. I mean, it's a golf tournament, of course, but it's not during the not while he's playing. So the funny thing about that was, though, of course, I offered to pay, which of course would be not expensive. Seve insisted on paying. Because Seve insisted on paying, the management said that it was on the house. So nobody paid.
Well, that's one of the.
They wouldn't have done that for me, I'm sure.
One of the benefits of dining with the great man.
Yeah, exactly.
But 1988, that win at Lytham, his 5th and final major championship. Again, another Monday finish. He was playing with Nick Price and Nick Faldo as a 3-ball on the last day. Did you follow that group?
Yes, indeed. I mean, they're playing threes because there'd been a washout of the third round. So the final round was Monday. It was clearly going to be, such as one can safely say, it's going to be one of those three who was going to win it. And through the first 6 holes, it could have gone pretty much either way. And then Seve makes an eagle on 7, then makes birdie on 8, and he had it under control, sort of, the whole time. But, Nick Faldo kind of fell away somewhat. But Nick Price stayed in contention, as everybody knows. He gets to the last hole, and Seve is leading by 2, hits it in the rough. Not badly enough. Hits it over the back of the green, and then hits the most exquisite chip shot to, well, it's dead, basically. And so now Price has to hold a 30-footer to keep things alive. And he didn't.
And I read somewhere or heard somewhere that Seve described that chip as possibly the greatest shot of his career, which, he hit that chip a million times in his life, but it wasn't straightforward, was it? It was sitting down, and also with all the scar tissue of what had happened in 87 and 86, that was a hugely important shot, wasn't it?
It was, and it wasn't easy. It was, the sort of the tufty little eye it got. Wasn't, of course, he made it look ridiculously easy. I mean, it's one of those things when you watch it back, you think this time it's going to go in, because it seems almost impossible the ball isn't going to go in. It's travelling at almost no speed. It looks absolutely on line for the hole. At that speed, you don't know how it doesn't drop it, but it hits the hole. But it didn't go in. But in the end, of course, it didn't matter.
And what do you remember of his post-tournament press conference? When he came in his champions press conference, and did you feel at that point that might be the last major for him, or did you feel that there could be another 5 in the locker?
No, I mean, obviously to have been first is peaceful. I certainly didn't. I'm not going to say I thought he'd had it and he wasn't going to win another major. I mean, clearly that's, in fact, the Masters next year when he let it go after the last 9 was really the last time he was going to win. He sort of had a vague chance at Birkdale in 1991.
You're listening to This Golfing Life, a Sounder podcast. For 20% off your next Sounder purchase, simply enter the code POD20 at checkout. That's POD and the number 20. Check out new season polos and year-round wardrobe staples at soundergolf.com. Code limited to 1 use per customer. 1992, you went to Pedrena in Spain. I was fortunate enough to visit Seve at his home shortly before he died. But in 1992, you took some incredible images of Seve on the beach, didn't you?
Yeah, oh God, what a day that was. So that was, by the time we'd started working with Seve on this instruction, I'd learned a lesson with him that trying to do it at tournaments was always a nightmare, because he'd always saying, "Oh no, not this afternoon. We do it tomorrow. We do it tomorrow," or whatever. We'd finish up rushing things, and it would be a horrible sort of rush in the middle of a practice round or something. So I'd said to him, well, how about we come to Spain? He said, "You want to come to Spain?" I said, "Yeah, we'll come to Spain and do them here at your home." Of course, yeah. So we turned up, and I was pretty jet lagged because I'd just got back from a tournament in Singapore, I think it was. And we turned up at Pedrena Golf Club, 9 a.m, sack of film ready. And honestly, I can honestly say by the time we got to 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, we'd done 6 different articles, which is basically a whole year's supply of photography done. So we have a nice lunch, and during the lunch, he's very happy because he's, all the work's done, and he's had fun doing it. He's tried to kill me with a low stinger and this sort of stuff. I make him move, stuff like that. And and during lunch, I just said, "Seve, I'd love to see where you hit balls as a boy, the beach. Do you want to come to the beach? We'll go to the beach." He disappears into the kitchen and comes back with a napkin and a soup can, which with the old style can openers, he'd taken out with the top of the can, basically. And he grabs a napkin off the table, goes downstairs, gets his practice ball bag, into his Range Rover, and off we go to the beach. And it's about 3 miles from the club. And he parks up. And I look at this beach, and it's like, how Turnberry's got an amazing beach. You just stand on top of those dunes at Turnberry, and you just look for miles, and it's just rock hard sand. And you can see and the tide's out as well, which was another key factor. Sheer luck. It wasn't planned at all. So, and he said, "Hold on." And he disappears into a hedge, literally into a hedge, and comes back with a stick as well. So he then proceeds to get onto the beach, and he starts. Soup can goes into the sand, pulls out a bit like a sandcastle, the opposite way of making a sandcastle. He digs the hole with this thing, turns the can over, plops it in. There's his hole. And unbeknown to me, he's also hammered a hole in the bottom of the can where he can put the stick in. So the stick goes into the sand.
Attention to detail.
Napkin, and then he starts putting. And then we start doing, I think we hit some 9 irons, and then he started hitting 3 irons down the beach. And and it's all finished, and I've got oodles of film, a sack of film. And I'm packing all the cameras away, and I start walking towards the car. David, where you going? I said, oh, fantastic. So we've got absolutely everything you want. And Richard Simmons was the writer with us there. We've got everything. No. We go collect the ball. So he marches us off down this beach, and it's freezing cold. And, adrenaline, by that stage, I'm suddenly collapsing because of my jet lag, and my adrenaline levels have suddenly dropped. And he gets back into the car. We've eventually found 33 of 34 or whatever it was. I said, I don't like losing Titleist. Like this, shaking his head, muttering away in the front of the car. But yeah, what a day. And then he took us to dinner that night at this lovely little fish restaurant in Pedrania. And my pictures are on the wall in there. And it's just, what a trip that was. What a day.
Yeah.
I think it's still the highlight day of my life.
Really?
In my career. Yeah. My photography career, definitely.
He had, as I said, was still playing at this point really well in the Ryder Cup as well, which of course is really high-end golf. It was only really after this, which if you like culminated probably now as wretched his golf was, in the Ryder Cup singles at the Belfry in 1993, and then pretty well up to do the singles of the 1995 Ryder Cup at Oak Hill, that you realised how his game had almost fallen to bits.
Somewhere I'm very fortunate, or have been fortunate enough to go on a number of occasions, is to Crom, Montana, for the the Amiga European Masters. You, Seve, and Billy Foster were in
3 people who witnessed that shot.
1993, and every year I go and see the plaque on the 18th hole at Crom, Montana. Tell us a little bit about the scene underneath those trees next to the wall surrounding that swimming pool in 1993. There's only 3 of you in there.
Yeah, I mean, and two random spectators at the back as well. But, it was like he was on such a roll. I think he'd birdied 5 holes in a row or something to get either into lead or tied for the lead, playing the 18th at Cron. And it's got this sloping fairway. So you've got to hit it top side. If you're anywhere right, you go off down into the trees, or as Seve did, right behind this wall. And he's probably 5 feet, I think, from the wall or something pretty close anyway. And he's on his hands and knees, and he's like a bull, a Spanish bull would do. And he's in deep conversation with Billy at this point. And I can see Billy shaking his head going, like this. And I'm lying down by this stage because I'm thinking I can get under the trees that I'm sort of off. I'm not in his way or anything, but to get myself the best angle. And finally he decides, looking at a window this big probably, above where he can go through the tree, up over the wall towards the green. And Billy passed me shaking his head, and some proper expletives, to say, idiot, why don't you just chip it out? And even the television crews were totally expecting him to chip it out because there's no camera. The camera crews were with him, but they didn't go down behind him because they thought there's no way he's going to hit this, try and attempt this shot. Anyway, a typical Seve swathe of a shot. Everything moves, and I'm waiting to be hit by the ball because with the angles, I reckon if it hits the concrete, it's going to come straight towards me, 90 degrees. I could be, Anyway, no noise. And one thing I have learned in my career is that the ball is in the air for 6 seconds most of the time. You can count 6 seconds, whether it's a full wedge or a driver, from being hit to landing. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then there's an enormous roar. And obviously, the ball has landed just short of the green from nowhere. I mean, it's still the most incredible golf shot I've ever seen. Well, one of the most incredible golf shots I've ever seen. But the fact that Seve hit it and he took it on, and
and then he chips in to force a playoff.
Well, no, before that, I turned around and I didn't have a camera up at that stage, so stupidly, but there's Billy on his knees going like this as Seve walks out of the trees.
But, I mean, Seve was the character. I mean, Seve was, we were so lucky to play with him and be sort of in his presence, really, because he was such a charismatic guy and he was the greatest player I've seen to watch play. I mean, I loved watching Tiger play because Tiger hit incredible shots, but Seve was even more watchable than Tiger, I think, as he was way more interesting than Tiger just the way he carried himself and the charisma he had. I don't think Tiger's golf was charismatic, but he himself wasn't. If Seve was the measure of charisma, Tiger wasn't close. He was still incredible to watch, but Seve was unique in that sense, I think. So, we're all, and I think everyone would say that Faldo and all those guys would say we were all incredibly lucky to have been around him and been able to see him play. And
there was a chance, an amazing picture. It doesn't matter what he was doing. He had that charisma and expression and everything he did.
And people have talked about, with Seve, when he walked in the room, you'd always know that he'd walked into the room because he had this presence. How did you sort of feel about, that one-on-one time you had with him, and what did that give you in terms of an understanding?
I think that it obviously get a period of time to know him away from the golf course, but obviously the more you get to know him, the better it was. I mean, he used to do, he was good. I mean, he would talk, and obviously time he'd tell you, then there'd be more like, I'll tell you this, but this is off the record. And there'd be then more of that, which of course is always helpful because although you can't use this, it gives you a perspective of what you're going to write. Yeah, and of course, as you know, you've done this yourself, you never betray your confidence because if you do, A, it's bad, but B, you're never going to get talked to again.
You're listening to This Golfing Life, a Sounder podcast. You can find out more about Sounder at soundergolf.com. I was at the 2006 Open with Golf Monthly at Hoylake, which was Seve's farewell to the Open, and I followed him for 36 holes with Javier on the bag, his son Javier. You've got some nice photos of that. What are your memories of that last appearance of Seve at the Open?
I don't know.
I have mixed feelings about it. It was sad, but it was
very sad, but also very important.
Yes.
And I think for Seve as a father, that was almost a highlight of his career. Having Javi on the bag, and if you ask Javi about it, for him that'll be one of his greatest memories of being able to caddy for his dad in an Open Championship.
Just looking back on Seve and his sort of role in your life, how do you assess the man, the talent, the golfer, the sort of force of nature that was Seve?
Well, he was great, and to know him was great. A thing which is not obviously, of course, it is horribly. Obviously, Seve died in 2011, having been obviously ill, kind of nastily ill for 2.5 years. I have kept in touch somewhat with his family, which is nice, with his kids, and so it's nice that goes on. In fact, I think I'm right to say his daughter has recently had a baby who's called Seve.
There wasn't anyone who didn't love Seve. Certainly in Europe and Australia. I don't think they ever understood him in America. They never got him, really. But we loved him in Australia, and they loved him wherever he went in Europe. He was a beloved figure, really.
Thank you for listening to This Golfing Life, a Sounder podcast. You can find out more about Sounder at soundergolf.com. If you want to follow me and find out more about RNGC, Britain's premier backyard golf course, you can find me on Instagram at RNGC2021. Thanks for listening.